Hi, everybody. So I am excited to be able to show you a little bit about how I broke through a wall and also solved a little bit of a mystery that I found actually during my research. Did not even know this existed. So let's get to it. And hopefully, this will also help you in your research and make you, just start thinking of other strategies. My name is Irisneri Alicea Flores. I am the founder of Descubre tu Historia and a professional genealogist. I help Latinos and Latinas connect to their ancestor stories through the building of a genealogy tree, identifying ancestors, putting together as much as we can of all the pieces possible to see their stories, learn from the past, which helps us understand ourselves better here in the present, and then also helps us decide where do we stand from here on out into the future. So, and never needless to say, it is a very empowering and healing journey. So I want to introduce you here to my great grandfather. His name was Zenen Alicea Colón. I, like many of us, probably have the same story. I didn't really know my great grandfather, from my dad's side, and this is my paternal side. Unfortunately, I only saw him maybe once. So and this is just to give you a point of how much I knew. I didn't really know a lot about him. And so I knew his name was Zenen Alicea, and that's about it. I didn't know where he was born. The last time I saw him, he was living in Bayamon, so I figured, okay, he's from Bayamon back then, obviously. But no, he didn't. He was actually born, according to records, he was born in Sidra. And to this point, I didn't even know that my family had connections to Sidra. Well, one of the first records I did find my grandfather first through my grandfather Rogelio, and I confirmed or corroborated the information through my grandfather's death record, and in I think it was the 1930 census where my great grandfather appears actually enumerated with my grandfather. So that was the other way I found, kind of followed him. So I actually want to use another cautionary tale. See this here. Be careful with that. Which is why a lot of people sometimes don't go into the records and read the records because all of this is wrong. The B that they put in the census record for Puerto Rico is actually B for blanco o blanca. So just be very careful with that and always read the records. So here I find Seneng for the first time. Kind of see him in a different record, and I know, okay, he's the head of household. He is actually put in as colored, so they didn't put B, but just a warning, that is sometimes I do see that in the indexed part of that transcription. So he was put in as colored, 35. CC, and that is contrato consensual. It means they were not legally married and they were what we call, I guess now, a common law marriage. And yes, that was very common. It says here he and his parents were born in Puerto Rico, and he was a vendedor ambulante. So he sold stuff on the streets. So he might have sold maybe fruits or things like that. Ambulante means he worked in the street. He didn't work at a store or anything like that. The people that you see sometimes, selling flowers in Puerto Rico or los churros and things like that. Well, that was my grandfather. So I'm sure back then it was more like frutas and things like that. um, then he's with my great grandmother, Cristina Agosto. And then here is Antonia Licea Agosto, who was my great grand aunt, and I never got to meet her. She also passed very young. She passed when she was 21 from tuberculosis. And then here's my grandfather, Rogelio, and he was about 8 years old in this record. So this is how I started the trail for my great grandfather. So we're going to go back to him. And of course, at his descendants, we all carry the last name Alicea. His, his mom I mean, I'm sorry, we all carry his last name Alicea, the paternal last name. My grandfather was Alicea, even though Zenen and Cristina never got married, but that, it's still, you could still do that in Puerto Rico. If you could just carry your paternal last name. Um, well, imagine my confusion. Tell you, these ancestors sometimes. I wish they were around so we could ask questions. So imagine my confusion when after confirming that his mom was Anastasia Colón, and I find the 1910 census. And it says Anastasia Colón de Montañez. Okay, it looks like my second great grandmother might have been married a first time. Okay. Now here's my great grandfather, and he was enumerated as Montañez Colón. Okay. Then I go to the next page, and I find who I had already identified as my potential second great grandfather, López Alicea Aponte, but he's in as a pensioner, and he is widowed. And so is my second great grandmother. And if you see the dates here, so if Zenen was Lopez's son, that means Zenen at this point, 11 years old, 1910, would have been born. I mean, I have his date approximately at 1894 because of the Social Security application, but according to this, he could have also been born around 1899. And please know these discrepancies are very, very common. So okay. So imagine my confusion. So apparently she had been married to a Montañez, even though I had already through the records from Senen and some of his other children, because Senen eventually did start another relationship and had children with another woman. And through those records, you know, consistently Lope Alicea is mentioned as his father. In his death record, Lope Alicea is mentioned as his father. And we carry Alicea. Montañez, I never knew. So you can imagine my confusion. And obviously, the oldest child here is 17 years old. So what's happening? Am I Alicea or am I Montañez? Well, so here, this is where my confusion started. So I started to go back. I went to Lopez. As you can see, since then I have been able to find more information. And I have my grandmother, my second great grandmother, Anastasia Colón Rondana. I did find there was a reason why he was enumerated as widowed in the 1910 census. He had been married to María del Carmen Escribano, sometimes appears as Carrasquillo. And okay, so that corroborates. Anastasia Colón Rondana had definitely been married to a Miguel de los Santos Montañez Flores, who I am actually related to also through the Flores. So, um, yeah, that happens. That's a whole other endogamy, a whole other video. Um, and they've had children, and they married in 1873, and he apparently died around 1890, which would explain why she was widowed in 1910. And actually, it is after she starts a relationship with Lopez. The date of birth for Juana is definitely approximate. She could have been born a little bit later, as you can see. So Lopez passes in 1916. I found the death record first. So eventually we'll get to the record that solved or cleared up a lot. At least made me feel, okay, I am Alicea. And so here is his death record. And I want to show you this so you guys can see how much information we can potentially get from these civil registration records. So he passed in Calle, and always look at this part, compareció Santiago Alicea, corroborates, because I have a Santiago Alicea, that was his son. casado. So Santiago was married, labrador. He was naturally from Caguas, which also corroborates with what I had found about him and his mom. And he was reporting that Lope Alicea Japonte, who was 60 years old, might have been older, married, was naturally from Caguas, was a labrador. He was living in Barrio de Rincón in Calle at that point. And he passed from Uremia. And at the time of his death, he had been married with Anastasia Colón, naturally from Caguas. So there's my grandma, second great grandma. And she, vecina de Calle, means she was living in Calle. And she was 30 years old, which is not, she was older. That means that she might have appeared younger. So, um, and she was trigueña. And he was leaving 5 children: Matilde, Zenon, Lorenzo, Juana, and Maria, all living in Calle. So abuelo appears as Zenen and Zenon, both ways. And that is common with the Zenen name. You can see it in both names. So it is curious that Santiago, who I have confirmed to be his son, did not put himself as one of the children surviving him. And actually, and I think and he doesn't declare himself as his son either. So in this section 5 of this form, not all the civil registration forms look like this, but in this particular form from the 1960s, the 1910s to 1920s, I think you see this form more often. In the section number 5, it tends to tell you what's the relationship the informant has to the deceased. And el declarante hace esta declaración según su leal saber y entender. So it tells me there was definitely maybe some, family tension there, something, because it is curious to me that he did not declare himself as his son, and he was. Right. But it doesn't tell me. So it tells me that he's definitely, so one thing I see, okay, the death record is telling me that these kids, including my great grandfather, he did recognize them as his children. I felt like I needed more. I really needed, to know more pieces. Where did Miguel, what happened? How does this fit into this? And then I find the marriage record, which I did find. So I put the links in here for family search. And let me tell you, you need family search if you're doing this, if you are doing research I just pulled up the wrong marriage record. I pulled up her marriage record from for Miguel. So she did marry Miguel in 1873. Obviously, this is before 1885. So that means that I would have to hit the church records. And since they married in Caguas, and I know the church records for Caguas have been digitized, I was able to find their marriage record. But please know that church records, you're going to find them in Family Search. You are not going to find them on Ancestry. All right, so here we go. This is the marriage record that I'm looking for. So this is when Anastasia and Lopez got married, or Lope. So Lopez Alicea was a jornalero, trigueño. He was 50 years old, lived in Sidra at the time. He was the son of Eustosio Alicea, which also I have found to be Cristosio, Crisostomo, and Leonarda Aponte. And he was widowed. He was a widow of Carmen Escribano, and it's funny here, it says that he had no children from this marriage. So I would think that definitely there was something there in regards to his relationship with his son. And then we get down here. Talks about Anastasia. She lived in Sidra also. In this record, she was 38 years old. So, from 38 in 1910 to 30 years old in 1916. See how we get these discrepancies? Normal. Says here, Anastasia Colón Rondana is viuda de Miguel Montañez. So she was a widow of Miguel Montañez, with whom she had 2 children, Francisco y Juliana. su color trigueño y su nacionalidad puertorriqueña. And it says here Anastasia Colón Rondana. So this is the part here that finally, oh, this is just that they're not, it's saying that they're not related, that Lopez and her may not be related, are not related as far as they know. So here it finally told me, okay, so things seem to be, evidence has been mounting to the fact that I am indeed Anastasia, and that Anastasia, the two children that she had with Miguel, who, as far as the timeline is concerned, it definitely fits, were Juliana and Francisco. And of course, then I went into Francisco and Juliana and try to get more information through them to corroborate this information, because it is very important to go as much as you can, not just into the great grandparents, but you want to go into to their children, and then us and to their grandchildren. So as you can see, I do have Juliana in Francisco. And then I did identify two other children that she had with Miguel through the church records. So I hope this video helps you a little bit. It also, I get to share a little bit of my own family story, and a mystery that I didn't even think I would find. And that was the fact that I wasn't sure about for a minute there. I was like, okay, so are we montañés? And it's funny because then you start talking to family, and sure enough, my dad did confirm also that he was always told that we had cousins that were montañes. So that definitely, so it's just these pieces that start to come together. And my great grandfather passed actually in 1995. I was actually 15 years old, but we had already moved here to the United States. So, to the mainland United States. So I never got to meet him. So I do wonder how much, if I had gotten the chance to talk to him, considering, my dad likes to, when he can, he does tend to talk about the past and history. And so it would have been interesting to talk to Abuelo Zenen. From what I hear, he remembers seeing the soldiers, the American soldiers arriving in Caguas and playing baseball with them. So it's as a kid, as a very small kid. So that does also tell me that maybe the 1894 date might be correct, not 1899, because 1899 would put him being born after the American soldiers arrived. And 1894 would have put him around the perfect age of a child, you know, seeing these things through a child's eyes, and the fact that they played baseball with him and things like that. But so it would have been interesting to one day had been talk to him. So whenever you can, talk to your elders if it's possible, and see and listen to their stories and the things they have to say. All right, everybody. Well, I hope this helps. And if you have any questions, comment below. Bye, everybody.